All right, so I'm ready to call this meeting to order. Ms. Lowe, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Byrne, Ms. Ehrlich, Ms. Gibson,
Here.
Ms. Webster,
Here.
Ms. Yaroslavsky,
Here.
Ms. Sparbon.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite people to make public comment on items that are not on the agenda. And I'd like to remind everyone who wants to speak to limit your comments to 3 minutes, please. Is there anyone present who has need to speak on items not on today's agenda? Seeing none, let's move to the next agenda item. Responsibilities of council members under the Open Meeting Act. Ms. Dobbs, would you please?
Good afternoon. Given that there are a couple of new MAC council members, we thought that this would be a really good opportunity for us to do a very brief refresher of council members' responsibility under the Open Meetings Act. Now, you'll remember that the Open Meetings Act is the law that requires that all of the business of the state must be conducted in the open so that the public has an opportunity to participate in the process and so that all the decision-making of the body is done in a transparent manner. And so that's the basic purpose of the Open Meeting Act. And a lot of the responsibilities under the Act come at the board staff level, such that they notice the public of the meetings, put out the agenda. That way the public understands what exactly will take place at the meeting, what items will be discussed, and so that they have an opportunity to prepare for and so that they can effectively participate in the meeting. The Act defines what is considered a meeting. And under the Act, a meeting is defined as any congregation of the majority of the members of the state body to discuss, hear, or deliberate on any matter within the subject matter jurisdiction of the body. The MAC, as you know, is made up of 6 members, so a majority would be 4 members. So, for example, if the board asks the MAC to make recommendation on, say, for example, regulations for physician supervision of midwives, and 4 members of the MAC decide to engage in a discussion outside of the view of the public on this topic, and they can either do that in person or over the telephone or even over email. And they're doing this without notifying the public, without the meeting being formally noticed, then that would be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. Similarly, a situation could occur, similarly, a violation would occur if 2 members decide to discuss this particular matter and then they each call another member of the MAC on the same matter in an effort to somehow come up with a consensus on the matter. And of course, this again is done without the required notice requirement. That would be a violation. This would be called a serial meeting in that, you have 2 people, then 2 turns to 4. That gets you the majority. And of course, they're discussing a matter that's within the jurisdiction of the body. That would be a violation. Those kinds of things clearly prohibited. So in addition to avoiding actual discussions, actual violations, as these examples demonstrate, there also has to be efforts made to also avoid the perception that things are being discussed outside of the public's ear, or that backdoor deals are being made by members of the MAC. So to this end, as MAC members, care should be taken also to make not to make public statements about matters within the jurisdiction of the committee. And so, though when you discuss matters that are within the jurisdiction of the MAC, out in the public, outside of a meeting setting, you're certainly free to give your opinion on things, but as MAC members, care should be taken in doing so. So, for instance, if, for instance, you are blogging on a subject, it's a topic that's within the jurisdiction of the MAC, though you may be stating your opinion, as a MAC member, members of the public could easily perceive that this is the opinion of the MAC, and so care must be taken to make sure that when you give your opinion, that the public understands that that is your personal opinion and not the opinion of the MAC. And of course, the same holds true for if you are just discussing matters within the jurisdiction of the MAC with members of the public. The same kind of care should be taken in those matters. Ideally, if you are approached by a member of the public and they ask you to comment on any matter that involves anything within the jurisdiction of the MAC, or a matter that involves discipline, which of course is not within the jurisdiction of the MAC, we recommend that you refrain from commenting. If the matter is related to a disciplinary matter, we recommend that you end the conversation immediately and provide the information to board staff so that it can be passed on to one of the disciplinary committees so that there is full information to all the parties involved in that particular disciplinary matter. Though you are not involved in disciplinary decisions, taking this approach would help dispel any kind of perception of inappropriate behavior regarding disciplinary matters. And as I said previously, the perception of improprieties is really important. It really is important that we do everything we can to dispel that. For other matters that may come up, someone may approach you about another matter within the jurisdiction of the MAC. We recommend that you pass that information on to the chair of the MAC or onto the staff of the board so that if appropriate, those matters can be added to the agenda and so that a public discussion of the matter can take place. I think that covers all the fine points that I wanted to touch on today. So are there any questions from any members?
It isn't so much a question as I have a request, which is that the specific recommendations that you've just made, Ms. Dobbs, that be written down as recommendations so that we can actually carry that away with us, because holding it in our brains at this point is difficult. And I appreciate that we have all of these many pages of the Bagley-Keene Act, but it's hard to wade through. So that would be my request.
I can provide that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was a little unclear as to what we would be reporting. You said if someone were to come to us about a disciplinary matter, that we would terminate the conversation and then report back to someone here at the medical board. What exactly would we be reporting? Just their name, or?
Good question. So what we recommend that you do is someone approaches you, and it could be a simple example as, my coworker is going through this disciplinary matter, and I just wanted to provide you with some information. Stop them right away, and what you would report is the date and information, whatever information they provide to you before you were able to stop them. And the information, you would detail information of exactly what happened and the fact that you stopped them, and at what point you stopped them. And what that does is it allows the decision maker to know exactly what happened, so that it doesn't taint the impartiality of the decision makers later on. It doesn't have an opportunity to do that. Okay?
Thank you.
So, to Ms. Ehrlich's request to have a sheet of some sort, would it not also maybe be a help to have that information posted on whatever official websites that the midwifery community is engaged in reading?
Yeah, I can certainly ask the staff of the board whether that is something that they would be interested in doing.
Okay. I also have a question. In this age of internet where we're all connected on Facebook and Yahoo groups and things like that, how do we deal with that? And if, for instance, 4 members of the MAC are on the same Yahoo group, is that a violation if we never say anything but we're just observing? When does it, or is it a violation no matter what, since everybody knows who the emails are going to?
You said if you don't say anything?
For instance, if I was on a Yahoo group and I was just observing the flow that was coming through and never responding, and Barbara was on there and Karen was on there and Faith was on there also, when does it only become a violation then on that group if we're actually providing comment? How does that work?
No, I don't think the determination comes in when you provide comments. I think the violation of the Open Meeting Act would occur if you engage in discussion, and in doing so, it's a matter that's within the jurisdiction of the MAC. Now, you can participate and talk about things that is not within the jurisdiction of the MAC. That's similar to attending a conference and you have all the members of the MAC sitting in the audience. You can do that. That's not a violation of the Act.
But if it's a group that is 100% midwives talking about midwifery issues, that's going to be within the purview of the MAC. So,
okay.
So that's what I'm trying to get to.
Okay. The best way to avoid violations there, or to avoid the perception of a violation there, is to make sure that whatever comments you made, that everyone understands that your comment is your own personal opinion and that this is not a decision of the MAC.
So to have a disclaimer at the bottom of your email, like...
Yeah, to do whatever you can to make that absolutely clear.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions on this? All right. Is there any public comment? Okay. I want to just remind everybody to please turn your cell phones off or set them to vibrate. And the meeting's being webcasted. If you'd like to provide public comment, please fill out a form, and they're located in the back of the room, and you can hand them to Miss Morris. She's right here. Perfect. All right. So I'd like to move on now to approval of the minutes from the August 30th meeting.
So moved.
All right. So you're making a motion to adopt the book?
Yeah.
Okay.
I make a motion to approve.
Great. Do I have a second? Okay. Is there? Thank you. Is there any comment on the MAC?
Yes.
Okay, Karen.
I did a quite thorough reading of this twice, There are an incredible number of items on here that I think in the process of trying to summarize the meeting were misunderstood. And it would take a lot to go through here in this meeting and hammer out what they are. What I would like to do is to have the authority of the council to coordinate a reading of the minutes as written with the actual meeting recording, to make sure that what is being stated in these minutes is accurate, because at the moment there are more things in here that might not be or that are not, then I think we need to take that kind of time with here in the council.
And then bring it back to the next MAC to approve them? Is that your recommendation?
Yeah. And with the authority of the council that that one of us, and I am willing to take that on, be given the authority to go back to the recording and coordinate it with the minutes.
I think there's a transcript of the recording, which might be easier.
That would, if there is a transcript, yeah.
Is that something we can do?
I mean, you can certainly discuss it. You can
So
certainly.
let me ask you the question. You feel that the notes that you're reading either go into more detail than necessary or incorrect detail than necessary?
Incorrect, in nuance,
Okay,
some of it in
nuances, okay.
nuances, yeah.
So in order to have the minutes, I mean, that's a lot of work on your,
I know.
Okay. So I appreciate that, but I just want to ask you this question, that given we only meet 3 times a year, that if it would be to be coordinated, and that staff would have to get back to us to see if that would be okay, if it would be done in a timely fashion, so it could be included, because I don't think
Yes.
that you want to go.
We don't want it to go past the next meeting.
Right.
Understood. That would be fine with me. I would be happy to set a deadline halfway between here and the next meeting, perhaps so that I could get those changes to the staff, so that it could get reflected in the minutes. It seems to me this was an extremely important discussion that we had on the proposed regulations that then went off into other issues surrounding what the regulations are about. And it seems important to me that this be as accurate as possible for the minutes.
Does staff have input on this?
The minutes. The minutes were drafted based on an actual, we transcribed the recording. And the minutes are drafted from that transcription and have been reviewed by Ms. Lowe, myself, and Ms. Whitney. I believe the minutes are very accurate, but that's my interpretation of that. So Ms. Ehrlich is not sure about that. There's been a lot of staff time put into that. So
I believe it. And I appreciate everything that has been done. There's a lot that's taken a lot of time.
do what she's asking is very lengthy process, and you have limited staff time. So
If she made some recommendations for corrections that could easily be incorporated, would that incur a lot of staff time? Or
that would not incur a lot of staff time, but what I'm saying is if she wants us to sit down with her, go by line,
No.
I'm
No,
not
I
really
don't think
willing
that's
to
what
do
she's
that.
That is
proposing.
not what I'm proposing.
Okay.
I am not proposing that. I would like to receive the transcript and really be able to coordinate that with what I see in the minutes, because I think there are a couple of places, at least, that there was just a little bit of a misunderstanding of what was said.
Okay.
And I have a question just for future minutes.
Okay.
When you do that process, do you write things down verbatim, or is it sometimes summarized?
But the minutes are sometimes summarized.
The minutes,
But
yeah.
we
Transcript.
take that from the recording, so it's not summarized by one person, so which I'm trying to get at. So
All right. So I guess I need a motion. I need
Well, you
Barbara to withdraw the motion she has. And we need a new motion if we're going to go forward with that.
So let me ask you, I'll withdraw the motion. So what you're asking is on these minutes specifically, let me ask you, would you approve the minutes as they are received with additions or corrections?
As if forthcoming.
We don't want to do that, okay?
Okay.
I'll withdraw the motion, but I'm trying to figure out how this is going to work. It's not, I don't know. how
Ms.
it's
Whitney's going to help us.
If I may, Linda Whitney, Executive Director, if you would go ahead and table this with the council asking for any input to come back to staff so we can incorporate those so they come back to you so you can see all of those comments. You shouldn't be making a motion to approve minutes that you have not reviewed.
Okay. Is anybody opposed to tabling this?
No, so motion to table.
Okay. So this agenda item's been tabled then. All right. I now have a discussion of possible statute revisions. Ms. Lowe?
Good afternoon. This agenda item is for the legislation to possibly add certified nurse midwives as licensed healthcare providers who can supervise students. The issue of expanding the supervision requirements for midwifery students has been discussed at prior board meetings, and specifically to add certified nurse midwives to Business and Professions Code Section 2514, which would allow a licensed midwife, a physician and surgeon, or a certified nurse midwife to supervise students. Issues that need to be considered prior to moving forward with legislation would be that adding a licensee that is not within the board's jurisdiction would require outside input from the Certified Nurse Midwives Licensing Authority. Also, certified nurse midwives may not have the authority to supervise a license type that doesn't fall within their board's jurisdiction. Adding certified nurse midwives would also place the authority for action outside of the board's control, which may cause difficulty for the board to take action against a student who would be within our control. And this may not serve the board's mission of providing consumer protection. So at this time, staff is asking for direction from the council on what further action should be taken. If you would be requesting that we provide additional research to you before this is further discussed at the MAC meetings.
I'm wondering if we could get input from the BRN in terms of whether or not it's a problem on that end. I know that certified nurse midwives certainly supervise nurse midwifery students, so adding another license type may not be a big issue there. We may be assuming something that isn't in fact true. So if we could do that, I'm wondering if, I hate to suggest another interested parties meeting, but that might be some way to gather some input in a broader perspective. I think that, and maybe I just don't understand all the legalities of it, but in my mind, if it's a licensed midwifery student who's being supervised, that's where the board has jurisdiction. If the board feels like the certified nurse midwife that was supervising her was in somehow acting outside the law, I think the board could call the BRN and make a complaint across those lines. I don't know. I think that this is something that could be solved and should be, because it's very, very difficult for student midwives to find preceptors. And so when there are certified nurse midwives who are willing to precept and teach, I mean, our schools also have certified nurse midwives teaching in them. I think it's really important that we recognize those as the professionals that they are and as adequate supervisors for our up-and-coming student midwives in California.
Well, it's not, at this point, it's not a matter of just adding them to the legislation. Unfortunately, it's not that simple, but if you'd like, we can go back and provide you with the research information and the laws for this certified nurse midwives and their licensing authority.
I would just like to remind everybody that CNMs already appear in our authorizing legislation as professionals who may sign off on the experiences that a student has in order to qualify for her license. So the CNMs are already there. This is just another extension of definition of what they may do in order to work with licensed midwives who are, with student licensed midwives.
So let me ask you the question. In order to move this forward, you would need regulation anyway. I mean, all the research in the world is not going to...
statute change.
Right. All the research in the world is not going to make statute changes happen. So if we were to go forward, and to recommend legislation be drafted. That would cause something to go into the system where you would have an interested parties meeting, where you would get feedback from the community, where we would start to move this forward. What we're trying to do is regulate. We're not trying to loosen regulations. We're trying to tighten them up and assure that everyone is on the same page, correct? Is that what we're trying to do? So if we're trying to do that anyway, instead of moving this over into the let's research and find out more information and let's discuss it again, what are the barriers to moving it forward now and then taking a look at it?
I'd also like to add that I think in many ways this is actually in the purview of the schools themselves, because if they accept a certified nurse midwife as a preceptor for a student who is enrolled with them, that is how they get through their program. They graduate, and the graduated midwife gets presented to the medical board for licensure. So in some ways, it doesn't matter.
It still has to be in statute.
Right.
Ms. Whitney?
That's my point.
It still has to meet what?
It still has to be in statute. I mean, it has to be. They have to be listed.
It's happening, but it's
Yeah.
Linda Whitney, if I may help in this matter, this body would need to make a motion if this is something that you're interested in that would then go forward to the medical board. The medical board would put it on its agenda, and then that we would make sure that the appropriate parties were invited. Specifically, there is an association for the certified nurse midwives, and we'd invite them to come and make comments if they choose to. But that then would be something that the medical board would consider as putting into its sunset legislation, which is the appropriate place that we would discuss this in the coming year. So that would be something that you could consider if you wanted to move forward, but it would have to come to the medical board.
So yeah, I'd like a motion to recommend to the medical board that they consider this.
So move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Public comment on this issue. Seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? So the motion carries, and we'll send it to the board. Thank you. Ms. Lowe, you have a further program update. I'm wondering, before you go too much farther, whether you're going to give us a briefing on what happened with the regulations that we thought were going forward and didn't. Is that part of your presentation?
I can provide a brief update on that, yes.
That'd be great. Thank you.
So at the last MAC meeting, we had an extensive discussion on the two proposed regulations, the supervision and midwifery students and assistants and the drugs and devices. That was recommended from the MAC to be provided and presented at the full board for hearing, or recommend for hearing. And prior to the board meeting, it was decided that that would be included in our sunset report. And so it was not presented to the full board to be set for hearing, and it's still included in the sunset at this point, so we will be moving forward with hearing at this time.
So that's the supervision and the drugs and devices, correct?
Right.
Not students.
Not students.
I
yeah.
apologize.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. All right. Do you want to move forward with the program update then? Thank you.
Sure. Item A, licensing statistics, if you could refer to page 76 of your packets. As you can see, during the first quarter of the fiscal year 2012-2013, we received 8 new applications, 5 new licenses were issued, and at the end of the quarter, 272 licenses were in a renewed current status, with 29 in a delinquent status. At the last meeting, we reported that 42 licensees were delinquent in completing their annual reports to OSHPD, and at the end of this quarter, that number had only dropped to 41, so kind of remaining the same at this time. There are some additional stats on the chart if anyone wanted to review that. Moving on to B, enforcement statistics.
Wait. I have a question.
Okay.
When someone's license goes into a delinquent status, how long does it stay that way, and how long do they maintain the license without being licensed?
Delinquent status is 5 years from the expiration date, and they can renew it during that time by paying the past renewal fees and any delinquent fees. And then after 5 years from the expiration date, it would cancel out, which would require them to reapply for their license.
Is 5 years an appropriate amount of time? It seems like a lot is a lot is going along and nobody's
They
being
can't
reined in.
practice legally that.
Right,
during
but
that.
they're kept on the books, the staff has to be bothered. I mean, is that a reason, I don't know, is that a reasonable, if it's a reasonable amount of time, it's a reasonable amount of time, I don't know. Oh, it's in statute, then obviously it's reasonable.
All right. It's everything in statute.
Can I ask a question too?
Sure.
You mentioned that only one additional person had submitted their delayed report. Do you do anything to try to solicit that once the deadline is passed?
At the beginning of the year, when the expiration had passed or the due date had passed, we sent out a delinquent notice to those that had not sent in their surveys. What normally seems to happen is when those licensed midwives come up for renewal, they're ineligible to renew their license until they complete that. So they complete the survey and then they renew it. So we do catch up with them at some point. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to enforcement statistics. On page 77 of your packets, we provide the statistics. During the first quarter of the fiscal year, we received 4 complaints. One of those complaints was against an unlicensed midwife. 2 investigations were opened. 1 case against a licensed midwife was referred to the Attorney General's office, and 1 case against a licensed midwife was referred for criminal action. And you'll notice that we have provided the stats for licensed and unlicensed for each category.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
And that concludes our update on the statistics.
Any questions on this item? Okay.
Item C is the licensed midwife annual report data clarification. During the August 30th MAC meeting, it was requested that staff provide an overview of the goals and objectives related to the data reporting processes. I just wanted to briefly explain the objectives behind that. In 2007, Senate Bill 1638 was passed, resulting in Business and Professions Code 2516. And the intent was to make accurate data available to consumers and professionals relative to planned home births and to assist California licensed midwives in evaluating appropriate policy changes in midwifery education, scope of practice, and or the standards of care. Pursuant to Business and Professions Code 2516, each licensed midwife who assists or supervises a student midwife in assisting in childbirth that occurs in an out-of-hospital setting shall annually report to the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development, OSHPD. The law further defines the requirements of what is required to be reported to OSHPD. And since the implementation of this law, there have been concerns raised regarding the type of information collected and the manner in which it's collected, which will be further discussed by Ms. Sparvan in Agenda Item 8. So it's just a little brief update on that. Are there any questions? Okay. Item D, the student illegal practice letter. Hopefully you have received the letter by email or sent to you by mail. During the task force for midwifery students and midwife assistants that was held on September 20th, discussion ensued regarding the practice of unlicensed midwifery students soliciting for clients and employing licensed midwives to assist them in out-of-hospital births. A letter was sent to all licensed midwives in California at the end of November, which outlined that these practices were illegal and that licensed midwives involved in aiding and abetting a student in this practice may be subject to board action. Likewise, a student that was found to be in violation could risk possible denial of their licensure. We did provide you a copy of the letter on page 78 for your reference.
Thank you for sending that out. I appreciate it.
And we have received some feedback from midwives acknowledging that they've received the letter. We've also received questions concerning the practices that is currently going on in the community. And we just like to remind everyone that staff cannot provide legal interpretation of the laws, and that if there are questions regarding what is proper practice, they would need to consult their own legal counsel. So we can refer to the laws, but we cannot define them.
And yet that's what you've done in this letter. You don't agree with that? Okay. Go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
Okay. So does anyone have questions on the letter or on that update? Okay.
I actually do.
Okay.
I have also received or heard quite a few comments from people on this. And again, there's a certain level of nuance here that I would like to understand, along with everybody else in the state of California, what, I'll give you an example. There was one time where somebody who was studying with me, who had a very dear friend, who wanted my student to be her midwife, but she was not ready to be a midwife. The woman comes into my practice. I become her midwife, and the student performs all the acts of midwifery with me as her supervisor. In some ways, it sounds like that is not legal, given what you have written here, because she was in some ways soliciting, except that her friend came to her. How do we make these fine points clear so that people can really understand what they may or may not do? And also then in that same context, there is a certain amount of unclarity among the supervising midwives about what they may and may not do. And I would like to see this written out, clearly stated, so that midwives can know when they are taking on some actions with student midwives, what is okay and what isn't, what is expected of them in taking on this relationship.
Okay, and staff is able to refer back to the laws and regulations that we have in place. So at this point, it may be, going back to clarifying the regulations so that they're more clearly described for.
Wait, before you go back and deregulate what's already being regulated, okay? I think that this is very specific. I mean, I would agree that if you want to look for and try and find the opportunity that this is unclear, you could find that way. But if you look at what is written, it is extremely clear. It says that if you are out there soliciting business and you are employing and being employed as a midwife and you are not able to, you're not following the law. To me, that's very clear. The example that you brought is a whole lot of gray area unless the person, your student, was out there soliciting, I'm a midwife, I want to deliver your baby, I'm here to do it, come see me.
No, she was not.
Right, so what I'm saying is you're looking for the gray area. Don't look for the gray area. It's pretty black and white here. Go with the spirit of the law. The letter of the law is right here, the spirit of the law is here. I just worry that, in every dotted I and crossed T, you're going to maybe, but I really care, and I think that this is pretty, you're going to regulate to the point of how many breaths a minute you can take. You don't need to do that.
No, I agree with that.
I think that there's a big distinction between the student midwife who is out soliciting from the public women who want to give birth with her, versus a student midwife who has a friend or a family member who is looking for the services of a midwife, and she connects them with a midwife who she also happens to be the student of. That's a whole different set of circumstances. So, does anyone else have comments on this?
I would venture to say if there's ever a time that someone has a question of what is appropriate and what's not appropriate, you ask your legal counsel as was suggested.
Correct.
And that's all, that's your legal counsel as was suggested. You heard what I said clearly.
Your own private legal counsel.
Your own legal counsel as was suggested.
And that legal counsel may have a different opinion.
That's your legal counsel, and you. That's. Listen carefully to what I'm saying, please.
I'm hearing.
I'm trying.
Okay. Do you have more, Ms. Lowe?
Yes. Item D was the implementation of continuing education audit. A little background. Business and Professions Code Section 2518A details the requirements for continuing education for licensed midwives, indicating that 36 hours of continuing education is required every 2 years in order to renew the license. At the time of renewal, the licensed midwife is required to sign a certifying statement indicating that they have met the requirements. However, proof of completion of those hours are not required unless audited. Currently, we have not been auditing due to limited resources, and it has not been done for a couple of years. We're bringing the audit back, and we anticipate that the first audit will be done during the month of December. It's now an automated process where computer program randomly selects a percentage of licensed midwives based on certain criteria, that they're in a renewed current status, they have not been audited within the last 4 years, and so on. So if a licensed midwife is selected for the audit, they're asked to provide proof of their continuing education, and staff will then review that information to determine that it's appropriate hours by an approved education facility. So that does conclude my update. Are there any questions?
So let me ask you a question. When you do this audit, I think it's a great idea to do it. It's important, and I'm glad you're going to be able to do it. With the renewal notice that goes out to licensees, is there some kind of notification, there's this expectation? I mean, I know it's in the law, otherwise it wouldn't be there.
It's on the renewal.
It's on the renewal specifically what is required. So everyone is, there's no games, everyone is.
You have to sign the thing that you
Okay, it's like going
completed
through
it,
the DUI checkpoint with the police department. Good. You know you're not supposed to drink.
Right.
Thank you, Barbara. Is there,
I want to clarify.
is there any public comment on any of these agenda items that Ms. Lois just presented on? Seeing none, I'm gonna move forward. So this agenda item is the update on the Midwives Alliance North America Task Force. I think at our March MAC meeting, we decided that we wanted to have a task force to look at whether or not it was feasible or desirable to move the California statistical reporting process to utilization of the Midwives Alliance of North America's statistical database. And for staff time was not super available to conduct a task force, and it was decided that we do it here via the report that's actually in the binders, and I would assume available on the back table. Am I correct? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to assume, it might be too much of an assumption, but I'm going to assume that the MAC members have read the kind of position paper in Section 8 of the meeting materials. So I'm not going to repeat a lot of the information that's contained there, except to set the stage for discussion. So the position paper in your packets was drafted by Ms. Brown and Mr. Ackerman at my request several months ago in lieu of the task force. That paper was then forwarded to staff to review, which they did, and I met with staff, and there were some revisions that needed to happen with it, so I made some edits, and Mr. Ackerman and Ms. Brown also added information and did some edits, and that's how we got to the paper that is currently there. As I think most people know, there's been dissatisfaction with the current data collection system in California. We've been exploring alternatives for, I don't know, a year or more. And it seemed like moving towards looking at the Manastats project was the direction that both Ms. Ehrlich and Ms. Gibson were going in when they served as chair. MANA has an intact, well-informed data collection system that's used nationally. I think many of the midwives in this room and throughout the state know about the Manastats system and in fact participate. So some of the high points for changing our data collection system over to the Manastats project. It's a national database. This allows California data to be compared with other like data generated by like practitioners across the country. It will, if we change to the Manastats project, it will allow best practices to be identified and then implemented in California on a statutory or regulatory basis. The MANA data collection system was designed and is maintained by an interdisciplinary team for maternal child health research and information systems design and maintenance, something that we weren't able to provide here on the MAC when we developed the current system. Another high point for me is that the data is collected as women enter care, so it's not collected in a retrospective manner, which is what we're doing now. After the fact, it's collected as women enter care and before the final outcome is known. This fact alone significantly lowers the ability for a data set to be incomplete and it creates data sets that can be used for research and are less likely to be challenged by the medical and scientific community. Potential errors in the MANA-STATS database are flagged, and there's funding and ability to make sure that entered data is accurate. In other words, MANA staff's a review team that can actually contact midwives and say, is this what you meant to enter? And there's a whole process for that, which is detailed very fully in the letter. Currently, about half of California midwives are already participating. Several other states are beginning to mandate MANA-STATS for data collection, Oregon being one of them. In order for us to change what we're doing now and begin to use the MANA data collection system, we have to seek a legislative change because the criteria for how we collect statistics now in California is set down in statute. And we need that legislation to describe the data to be collected in broad enough terms that requirements can change as need be and that we can work on that in regulation rather than having to go back to the legislature each time and get statute changes. The reporting deadline or reporting time frame would also need to be changed to fit what MANA is already doing. So one of the suggestions would be to, instead of having it be reported on a calendar year, that maybe it would be reported on a fiscal year. And then the medical board's timeline could remain the same, and MANA wouldn't have to adjust what they're doing either. Another thing is that we wouldn't have this ability for midwives to be waiting to turn in their data set till they had to renew their license, because with MANA you can't do that. You have to be entering clients as clients appear in your care rather than waiting 18 months down the road to enter the data when it's time to renew your license. So that would be a change on the midwives' end that they would have to be ready for. There would also need to be financing found for MANA's startup costs of enrolling such a large number of midwives all at once and making sure that everybody's up to speed on how to use the program. I see several ways this could be funded, and of course, you know, as we go forward, there can be all kinds of creative ideas put forward. Basically, I personally believe that California should utilize the Midwives Annual Report summary from the MANA Statistics Project for reporting data, practice data by licensed midwives through OSHPAD to the medical board. Doing so would leverage an existing and mature process that would result in the most accurate aggregate data being reported to the medical board. The use of this process by California would allow California's data on out-of-hospital births attended by licensed midwives to be incorporated in total in a national database. The underlying data, that not included in the summary but used to create it, would reside in the MANA-STATS Research Registry, where it could be the basis of research to further understand and improve midwifery practice and outcomes in California. And before I take questions from the council, I'd really appreciate it if Jen Brown and Bruce Ackerman would just come forward so that if you have questions, you can have them there to address them to. So, if I'm understanding process, I have to ask for a motion to begin discussion on this or not? No. No, okay. So is there comment or questions from the Midwifery Advisory Council?
My first
Karen?
comment is I'm really glad to see this continuing to move forward. I thank Bruce and Jen for the work that they do on this. It's a huge job, and I appreciate what you do. I do agree with Ms. Paravon that we need to be making this move. I think it is absolutely in the best interest of the midwives in California and of the whole healthcare community to understand who we are and what we do, and for the public.
Okay.
I'm a big proponent of prospective recording of the data, however that you can make that happen.
I can appreciate all the work that went into this. I appreciated reading it, and I have to tell you that what it feels like to me is it's finally putting a label of professionalism on this profession, and it'll have the information, the statistics, and the transparency that we need to have. Who knows what the data is going to show, but at least we're going to show it from the beginning, move forward. So I support whatever we can do to get this moving, and I want to thank you for all your work, and also to both of you for getting this moved in the right direction. Thank you. So I have no questions.
Do either of you have anything you'd like to add? All right.
Is there any kind of motion that we could entertain here today to keep going?
The way this agenda item is written, it says update. It doesn't really provide notice to the public that you are going to be making any kind of decisions on this matter.
Uh-huh. Okay.
I think when the task force was originally offered up, the idea was to create an opinion to send forward to the full board. So I'm wondering if there's some way we can accomplish that given the wording of the agenda.
I'm wondering, given Ms. Whitney's engagement on the previous couple of issues, that this would be something that would be moved forward. Oh, here she comes. Oh, this would be now, the suggestion would move it forward to the medical board for them to make the recommendation to move this forward in the process. No, okay.
You might want to make a recommendation from the council to the medical board that you can pursue developing legislative language that would meet the intent of transferring the collection of data to MANA, but would also meet the intent of having the data delivered to the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development as you have written in here, so you get permission from the board to continue working on that so staff can work on that development. So that's what you would want to make a recommendation to the board. The board would look at it in January, or I'm sorry, the February 1st meeting, and then we could pursue that. Again, we will still be in sunset review, so there's opportunities if the board wants to pursue that in sunset review.
So basically, when I give my report on the 1st of February, then I would ask the board to have, as a continuing agenda, to have the MAC continue to work on language for this? Is that what you're saying?
As part of their sunset review and enhancements to the midwifery program. But it would still come back to you as well as then back to the medical board to consider putting into that legislation because it's not finished yet.
Right. Okay.
Should this be in the form of a motion then to make
Yes,
that recommendation?
please.
So move.
Seconded.
Is there any public comment? Seeing none. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? All right, so the motion carries, so we'll keep moving this forward. Thank you both for all of your hard work on this. I really appreciate it. And I just want to note that turnaround time was not very long both times we worked on this. So I really appreciate you guys getting it together real fast.
Thank you. And we're available for any of you to contact us if any questions come up.
Thank you. All right. All right, so we're down to upcoming meeting dates.
No, point of order. You did not do the update on the task force for midwifery students and midwifery assistants.
Yeah, we did.
Number 7. Was
Ms. Lowe gave that update or no?
Oh.
No, you didn't.
No.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I thought it was.
All right, just very briefly. On September 20th, the task force met here at the board. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss the role of midwifery students and midwifery assistants in the practice of midwifery. The meeting was attended by Ms. Faravon and Ms. Ehrlich of the council, 2 licensed midwives, 1 certified nurse midwife, and 1 California midwifery student, as well as board staff and legal counsel. Some of the issues discussed was the need for greater clarity in regulation or statute to provide students with actions in which they can or can't take during patient care. It was also discussed that further clarification was needed in regards to what supervision was required whether the supervising midwife must be on the premises or not, and what action could be taken prior to their arrival. Also the need for clarification on what constitutes a student and what constitutes a midwife assistant, as well as to define the student-preceptor relationship. The issue of whether a student must be enrolled in an education program approved by the board was also discussed during the meeting. Board staff and legal counsel are still compiling the information that was obtained during the meeting, and we'll continue to review the input that was provided. At this time, that concludes the update.
Ms. Lowe, would it be possible to get a copy of that report from you? I just am trying to write down the issues that you say came from that meeting. I couldn't write them down fast enough.
Sure, we can provide you with that information.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to know at this point, Ms. Lowe, about this particular item is how much of these problems, so I'm just going to call them that were discussed at that task force meeting, can be handled in regulation, or do we need to go back and get different legislation in order to write regulations that will cover the issues that were brought up?
And that's what we're currently reviewing still,
Okay.
and we want to be able to list out all of the different issues that were discussed and what the available options are for them. So once we have more information, we can report back to you with a further update.
So I'd like to ask that update be available for the March meeting. Is that going to be possible?
We will do our best.
Okay. And I'd also like to, well, maybe I don't even need to, do we need to ask the board to continue to put this on the MAC agenda, or is it assumed to be continued to put on the MAC agenda?
We'll continue to put it on the agenda.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comment from MAC members? Karen?
You know, I realize this is not necessarily popular at the moment. I continue to believe that we need to have statements from the organization, from the agency, that can prosecute midwives and take actions against their licenses, so that we know what the medical board expects of us, so that we can work to be in compliance with the legal opinion of the agency that supervises us and regulates us and prosecutes us. That's why I think we need to have things like what I just mentioned earlier, a real statement about if a midwife is going to be a supervisor for a student, these are the activities that she is expected to do. In the same way that we are talking about having statements about what midwife students may do. What may they do before the midwife arrives? That's as far as I got when I wrote down on the issues that you said. We're asking for some kind of clarification of these things so that we are not operating in the dark, and that the next thing we know is that the opinion that we have, and perhaps it is from our lawyer, varies from the opinion of the agency that supervises us and regulates us. I think we need to have these statements clearly written so that we know what we're dealing with and what our parameters are. So I would just put that out there as what I hope to see.
I think it's really important, Karen, to recognize that there's a very fine line between prescriptive regulations and regulations that leave us room to practice as midwives.
I'm not necessarily saying these should all be in regulation. I would like to see some kind of opinion come from the legal staff that we have to function with.
So let me ask you a question. How about if we were to take the last 5 years of discipline and ask staff to come back with us to describe in generalities issues of that caused, and Linda's shaking her head. I'm just wondering how broad the need is to. Look, I believe in regulation. I do believe in regulation. But I also believe in the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. Mm-hmm. And I also believe that less is more. And I believe that sometimes painting yourself into a box and having to ask if you can take 3 breaths a second or 2 will cause you to black out. So I just want you to take a deep breath on this one, and maybe you need to clarify it in the community as to what specifically is the weakness in how it's done currently. Maybe that's a better way of saying, maybe you need to personally talk to people that you work with or you know. Not a joint meeting, not a serial meeting, not an email meeting, just people you know, and make sure the cereal is whole wheat, you know.
Yes.
But seriously, to find out what are those issues that you're feeling that there's this weakness or there needs to be some strengthening, because I'm just concerned that our roles are going to get too minuscule and too narrow.
I'm not necessarily saying regulations. I'm saying statements. I know that this was a long time ago. I think it was in 1983. It might have been
way before you should be remembering.
Well, maybe it is, but there was
pre-legislation by 10 years.
There was a statement in
it doesn't exist. Don't bring up the statement unless you want.
Medical Board newsletter.
But it's not there now. Okay, so
as far as I know, it has never been changed. So that is what is on record as what unlicensed practitioners may do.
Karen. Don't worry about the
off
newsletter.
The agenda item now.
Pardon?
The newsletter.
We're off the agenda item now.
You're off the agenda, but what says, what your mother told you might not be true today. And she doesn't have to come back and tell you that you can go out in the rainy day.
Barbara, I completely appreciate what you're saying. I'm saying that there are unclarities. And that
who has the unclarities? Who has the unclarities?
The midwives in the state of California.
You need to talk and bring back specifics.
I think I would say that one of my observations is that midwives don't want to read what's written the way that it's written often. And I think when we get into trying to dice and slice what the law actually says rather than just reading what's on the page, we end up in trouble. And anyway, I'm gonna leave it there.
I appreciate everything that both of you are saying. I hope that there might be some way of coming to some kind of middle ground with a statement that does not have the force of law in itself, as regulation does, but that gives some guidelines.
So if you were to have public comment come forward here, or if you would offer public comment here, then that goes into the record. It's on the web, it's on the minutes, it's in the thing. So maybe that's the way to start to fashion public opinion. I'm not sure, and I'm being serious now, I'm not sure how much you want to discuss issues that we're not sure of what's being discussed. So we haven't had public comment of people complaining about anything, so therefore we can't assume that people are complaining. We are not having a discussion of what barriers are to care this minute. We've tried to address what those barriers are to care and try to get to a place where they don't exist. But what is continuing on, I think that needs to be part of some kind of a professional response, something more than he said, she said, that someone needs to come forward and say, this is an issue I have, this is a problem I have, and it's not being solved by whatever, and then staff needs to take a look at it, the law needs to take a look at it, and we can move it forward. I'm leery about doing rumor mongering, is what I'm suggesting.
I appreciate that. I just would also like to point out that the letter that has come is not a legal document necessarily, it's a legal opinion.
Right, but the letter that has come that I've read, and I don't do midwifery, okay, I understand I don't, but I also know how to read. And so I have to tell you that I read it and I felt that totally, it may be that you need to take yourself and take your hat off as a midwife and put your hat on as a member of the MAC. And I'm not suggesting that they are different, but I'm suggesting that what you want to do is make sure that the spirit of the rules and the regulations are there for people to do the job that they want to do. And if there's something that really, really bothers you that you really think that we're messing up with, I think then that becomes something, you need to tell us.
Okay.
But I'm not feeling that it's really there.
There is one other item in this whole issue of the students and what students may and may not do that has come to my attention, which is, and I would like some clarification on this, what exists among doctors and among nurses once they have been finished with their training but are not yet licensed, because there is some belief in the community, and I've heard this from several places, that those not yet licensed practitioners may work under the supervision of a licensed person. Ms. Sparrowbound is shaking her head no. Somebody here in the audience is shaking her head yes.
They can do training. They're in training program.
I know that do you want to address this, Ms. Whitney? Thank you so much.
This is an area that I simply do not know, and I would like us to get
First of all, I can't speak to what nursing has.
Understood.
We're the medical board.
Right.
But regarding physicians who are in training who are not yet licensed, they have a specific set period of time that they can be in postgraduate training prior to being licensed. They cannot exceed that period of time without being licensed.
Mm-hmm.
They can be in training that entire time. And for international grads, it's up to 3 years. But they cannot go beyond that 3 years without being licensed. They must cease and desist doing any clinical practice
After
until
the 3
the
years.
license is issued. And they are taken out of practice in their residency if they do exceed that time. Most of them get licensed well in advance,
of
so
course.
that's not an issue. So physicians clearly have a set period of time. Now, with midwifery, in terms of students, we had this discussion at the task force meeting. When the student period is over, then that student must get licensed. There is a gap. We understand that. But we do not have any law that covers that gap. So that's what was put into the Sunset Review Report as an issue that needs to be addressed, either covering the gap or you're not practicing. Because once you're finished as a student, you can't practice until you're licensed. And the other issues that came up regarding the students was who can assist and how. And none of that is defined in law. Mm-hmm. So the board put that as one of its concerns and issues in its Sunset Review Report related to midwifery. And that will be coming forward as the discussion in Sunset Review on whether the legislature wants to move forward with putting certain limits or additional language into law. And we don't know yet. We will be working with them. We have not had our hearing. That hearing most likely will be sometime in March. So we need to continue to move forward in this area. We will be looking at possibilities for language, but we do not know exactly how the legislature will react to a number of these issues until we have that hearing. It will be very important that the midwifery community participate in that legislative hearing when we get to the items related to midwifery.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So in terms of guidance, we cannot give a lot of guidance regarding this. And we were very clear in the meeting what was legal and is not legal. And we can't give guidance for the gray areas because they are gray.
So if people from the public are asking for a copy of the midwifery portion of the Sunset Review, where can they find it?
It's
and
online.
Is it diced apart, or is it like one whole big 30,000-page document?
You can pull the part that's just on midwifery and download that section.
Okay. And is it fairly easy to find online, or is
it should
on
be,
the medical board site?
I will make sure that we can email each of you to then forward to the larger community.
Fantastic.
And we will also put a link to that on the midwifery site.
Perfect.
Because that's a specific section that has to do with midwifery, and you should be looking at that. But there are a couple areas. It's not just midwifery, but you would want to go back and look at our executive summary, etc. But the midwifery section does go into the issues related to midwifery.
So, Ms. Whitney, before you move, might I suggest, would it be appropriate that once people do look at the site and do look and review the Sunset Review language, that if there are specific clarifications that are might be necessary, that they could direct those to Ms. Lowe or to Ms. Sparvon or to where?
Directing them to Ms. Lowe or to myself would
Okay,
be
so I
fine.
think that that's something that, again, could be put out as a notice on all of these, I guess, these websites by one person, maybe, because it's, I mean, you need to know, people need to know that it's there.
Yeah.
The staff has worked really hard on the Sunset Review. There's been a whole lot of discussion. There's going to be the opportunity to make the changes now, to do the cleanup legislation discussion, words, verbiage. If we don't take the opportunity, then we don't have any.
And we've taken many issues, not
Absolutely,
just
absolutely.
the student midwifery assistant, et
Right.
cetera, issues. There are other issues in there, so you will want to look, and I won't discuss those because we're on this agenda item.
Yes.
Is this a one legislative year process?
Yes, it is, usually. But they might bifurcate different items that come up in Sunset Review and put them into different bills. We have licensing items, we have enforcement items. I do not know if the legislature will want them in one bill or multiple bills. So if they're in multiple bills, there's always the potential that that bill is held over for a 2-year session.
Okay.
But the one part of the legislation that we will be pushing very, very strongly on would be the extension of the board so it does not sunset January 1, 2014.
I don't know.
Thank you very much, Ms. Whitney.
I do have one question
Okay.
relative to what we were talking about with the students. Is I know that there's at least one student here. Do we still have public
Yeah, I haven't closed out public comment. I don't
public
think.
comment? Could we perhaps hear from Ms. Perez as to this letter that was sent out? And you know, she's just finishing her program. And I think she'd be a relatively good spokesperson to give us a little feedback from the midwifery community. I'm sorry, I hope I don't embarrass you, but.
Is this time for public comment?
Yeah, it appears to be time for public comment. Thank you, Faith.
So I'm a student midwife and hopefully sitting for my exam in February, for my licensing exam.
State your name for the
Sorry,
record.
Laura, Laura Perez, Perez. I got notice of this letter from another student midwife and was surprised to learn about those activities. I think that among my peer group of student midwives, we're very clear about what's acceptable and not acceptable for us to do. I can understand some of the opinions that Ms. Ehrlich is giving in terms of there is a period where you are a midwife under supervision, you are still in school, you are still unlicensed, but part of the process is that you have your own primary clients, but you're still always under the supervision of a licensed midwife. So I can appreciate the gray areas as well in terms of what's okay, what's not okay to do. As a student, we, again, not soliciting, but people do want you or want to work with you, or you have, say, as an earlier student, you work with somebody, you're close to licensure, but you're not there yet. And so I had this happen to me recently. Someone came to me personally as a student and said, I want you to be my midwife. And I'm working with other midwives, so I can still work with them, but they're not my personal clients. So just to say that I think there's a ton of gray area. I appreciate the work that's being done, and I agree. I don't think overregulation is the answer, but it can be challenging. I think there can be trepidation among students in terms of what's within our purview and what's not necessarily sometimes, because there's all kinds of different situations that may arise. So I don't know what else I can say. That's about it.
I would just like to add that in that same context, those students who then end up finding themselves inadvertently on the wrong side of these legal issues is now being told she might never be able to get her license. And this becomes much bigger of an issue for these women. I would hate to see Laura Perez find herself in that position, or any other student.
Well, the way not to find yourself in that position is not to solicit clients. It's pretty clear.
That's all.
It's pretty clear.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And yet, what is saying here is that the midwife who takes is it only if a student solicits the client and then if the midwife agrees to do that birth and to supervise that birth, she is guilty of aiding and abetting the midwife, the illegal practice? Is it only if the student has actively solicited? Or is it if she is taking on the care of somebody who has come to a student and said, I want you to be my midwife, and the student comes to me and says, will you help me with this?
Wait, so I'm not an English professor.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not. But the letter is specifically addressed to licensed midwives so that they can give out the information to themselves as well as to people they might know. And in the first sentence it says, it's come to the attention that some midwifery students who are not yet licensed in the state are soliciting clients and employing licensed midwives to assist them in out-of-hospital births. So that if someone who is not a midwife but is a student is going out and soliciting, the verb here is to solicit, a client, and then comes to you and says, I need you to help me because I've gone out and gotten this person to be my client. I need you to help me do this.
And I'll pay you X for it.
And I'll pay you for that. It's not the other way around. That she read the letter, that Miss Lara read the letter because someone showed it to her. The letter was addressed to you. So you should know, as your license, you are the licensee. You should know that this behavior is inappropriate. That she knows it. That's good. She shouldn't ask. But you, as the adult in the situation, or the parent in the situation, or the professor, or the mentor, or whatever title you want to take, you know that this is inappropriate. So if she were to come to you and say, this is what I've done, you should be able to turn to her and say, you know, that's not appropriate. I can't help you out.
I can take her on as my client,
Right.
and you can continue to be my student
right.
and help
You
me
have
with
to
it,
be
but you
able to
can't do it this way.
You need to know what's right and wrong, and that's why this letter was written, so that you are the informer of the public. You are the educator. You are the professor. You are the parent. You are whatever title you want to put. You've just been given this knowledge, so use it. That's all it is. It's not such a big deal. Honest, it's not such a big deal. In my opinion, of course. As a non-midwifery.
And that's just it. Given the other gray zones, it becomes more of a big deal.
So as Ms. Whitney said, read the section, and if there are holes, plug them up.
Ms. Whitney's going to plug another one.
Did I miss up Ms. Whitney?
I obviously didn't make myself very clear. If someone comes to you, whether he or she is a midwifery student or someone who has never practiced midwifery, and asks you to assist with a home birth that this individual is going to be in charge of, you will be aiding and abetting. If somebody comes to you and says, I have someone who is pregnant and wants a home birth, if you are going to be a party to that as a licensed midwife must be in charge.
Has to be their client, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we all clear now?
Not anybody else's client. It's the licensed midwife's client.
I think that puts the point on it that we were looking for.
Thank you.
But the letter was addressed to licensed midwives.
Yeah, I think we've got it now. Is there any public comment on this agenda item? Ms. Ryan?
Hello, Jerry Ryan, representing Nijoni Institute. So I want to speak about this from the educator's standpoint.
Thank you.
Our students all realize that even if they have passed their exam, they are not a midwife until they have a license in hand.
Right.
And therefore, they fit within the guidelines of what we expect of them as students, which means if they're doing births, they are always under supervision. They are always with the midwife. They never come to the birth prior. The midwife shows up first, and the student shows up afterward. And I think some of the gray areas and the confusion are more amongst the midwives as opposed to maybe the students, at least from our standpoint. Our students are very sure about what their role is. I think one of the other issues that we look at is the student does not go off of our rolls until they get their license. We're under two very different boards in terms of our legislation or regulation rather. Both the Bureau of Post-Secondary Education here in California and the Midwifery Education Alliance, our accreditation council, and they have differing rules that we have to follow. So we really have to follow, in a sense, a lot more rules. So our students then go on an individual learning contract month by month until they receive their license. So that may extend their education from the 3.5 year academic program to upwards of 4 or maybe even 5 years, depending on when they're ready to sit for their exam. So I think some of this could be taken care of if the midwives in California, through the California Midwifery Association or any of those, could get together and have a discussion amongst ourselves, as well as we certainly would be willing to do that with preceptors that we have. And we have preceptors that go through quite an extensive vetting process to be able to take on our students. And I think maybe the discussion starting there would clear up a lot of things, and we could talk through varying situations.
I have a question. Do you know how well Najoni coordinates in those particular areas? For example, keeping the midwives, the students enrolled until they actually get their licenses. Do the other schools do that, or is this something that you don't know, or you do?
I do know that
Okay.
by MEEC regulation, we are required to have an independent learning contract. So my assumption would be that the other schools are supposed to do likewise. Whether they do or not, I couldn't answer that. But this is actually from MEEC, which is really coming downhill from the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education.
Yes, and the individual learning contract is defined by MEEC to include staying on the rolls of the school until the actual license is in hand?
They are not graduated from a MEEC accredited program until they have a license.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there any more public comment? Seeing none. Is your presentation then finished, Ms. Lowe?
Yes.
We really are done this time? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So we need to move forward with item number 9, which is advisory council dates for 2013. I'm envisioning, with the sunset review process going forward and thinking about legislation that may have to be crafted within the MAC and with the support of staff, that we will probably have some number of interested parties meetings or task force meetings in this coming year. And so I'm wondering whether 3 MAC meetings is appropriate as opposed to 4, and that maybe we'd like to do 4 and eliminate 1 or more interested parties meetings or task force meetings in this coming year. We did when we originally started, and we had the big startup of doing the LMAR and creating that. We did meet 4 times a year, and I know that we dropped back to 3 because we didn't have a lot on our plate, but it seems like this year is going to be fairly busy with midwifery business, and I'm wondering if staff has input on that. It rather seems to me it's no more difficult to organize a task force meeting or interested parties meeting than it is to organize a MAC meeting.
There is actually more work into a MAC meeting than an interested parties meeting. Because this topic is smaller, so less for staff to work on. 3 meetings is what we believe we have the staffing available time, considering we're in sunset.
Okay.
Depending on when you would want the 4th meeting would be depending on that. But if you wanted a 4th meeting in between the boards, spring meeting and their July meeting, that would be totally out of the question.
Okay. Because that would be the logical place to put it.
Exactly.
Okay.
During that time frame, we have a high workload for the physicians and surgeons. We also be working more on sunset stuff. Also, we have a new computer system that we're trying to get going, which we have a large amount of staff dedicated to working on that. So to put a meeting in that time frame is not even an interested party meeting in that time frame probably will not work. Interested party meetings at different time frames might work for us, and we can maybe look at that. But as far as a full MAC meeting during that time frame would not be possible.
I'm thinking ahead to how the board meetings are structured and when they are. And if this is a 1-year sunset review process, that legislative session is, things are going to be winding up around September, if I'm not mistaken. And I want to be sure that we've given adequate time ahead of the game towards looking at, the fact that, with supervision issue being on the table and that needing to be, I'm sure there'll be another interested parties meeting as we go forward with that, and the drugs and devices and the student issue, just those 3 things alone, and I'm not sure what else has been time-stamped in the sunset review, but I'm seeing that there's going to be need for time to discuss this stuff before August. And so I'm asking in advance that we figure out when the best times are going to be for that. I can't get board approval to go ahead till the 1st of February, but I think we can assume that we're going to probably need 1 or 2 interested parties meetings between then and July. And so I'm asking now how likely that is to happen.
Well, 1's doable for sure. I'm not sure about 2. That would depend on how the first one went. Because we do have time between now, but sometime between the end of January's board meeting and the next board meeting to do an interested parties meeting. I don't know if I can do 2. I can do 1 for sure during that time frame. So
is it?
Let me ask you the question. As the process of sunset review, when is the cutoff date that everything has to, all the I's need to be dotted and the T's need to be crossed as far as what is in the midwifery portion of the sunset review?
I'll have to ask Ms. Whitney that.
In terms of sunset review, we expect the first hearing on just the report that has been put forward to be sometime in early March. The legislation will not be totally developed until probably late April, and that may or may not be totally inclusive. At that point in time, there will be that legislative hearing related to that subject matter. So it's much more important to be at the legislative hearing than it is to have a task force or a council meeting.
So who will be crafting the wording of the legislation?
Well, we help craft it with the legislative staff, and then it goes to legislative council. So it's the attorneys for the legislature who actually draft the language that would go into the bill. We then comment on it and might get some revisions if they didn't get all of the nuances correctly written into the language. But mostly it is done by attorneys who are looking at the actual letter of the law, how it should be written. And then from discussions and the hearings, that language gets changed. So if the hearing is in late April or early May, then from that hearing, based upon the testimony, the members may vote to amend the bill to do X, Y, and Z. They're not going to say, here's the language. They're going to say to do X, Y, and Z, or to include these things. And then again, the Legislative Council will be working on that language as it moves forward. The important dates to note is that at your March meeting, we will be able to discuss with you how the board has reacted, one, to the suggestion to transfer the data to MANA and being able to move that forward to put in. We already have the board members supporting what is in the Sunset Review report. They will have done a supplemental report that mostly deals with enforcement, not really a lot of licensing or midwifery issues. But those things will be on the agenda in case there is something that comes back to you. So the March meeting is a very important meeting for you. In terms of during the summer, we're going to be going through the legislative process. We will have a sense of where we are in July, but we will bring that to you at the August meeting, because August is just before, your August 8th meeting is just before they come back into session, because they come back in mid-August through mid-September. And so we will be able to work with them if there's something that needs to be done. But again, it's the legislature's bill.
Okay.
And so I think you're okay, but we may need a meeting to discuss a specific issue, which we have some time for. But I think really in terms of the sunset process, attending those hearings and being a party to that is the most important part.
And it's sounding to me from what you've just said that it's probably going to be much more important for the midwifery community at large to be there and be a party to what's going on there with the legislators rather than any language being crafted here through the MAC. Am I hearing that right?
Right. We don't even take exact language to our board members because we're developing the concept, and we don't want, if you'll excuse the phrase, you to marry language, because the language gets changed, and then you feel that it wasn't changed, it was changed without your input. So we want you to have the concept that we're trying to write up in language, and as long as you agree with the concept, then we can move forward.
Okay.
And we can always wordsmith as we go through the legislative process if there's a problem with the wording. But again, it's a legal document, so.
Okay. I'm getting it.
Final.
I'm understanding the process better. Barbara?
Before you leave, would you recommend that somehow notification go out to licensees to review the website for the midwifery portion and for any comments or suggestions or holes that need to be plugged, to have that directed to Ms. Lowe prior to the March meeting of the midwifery, of the MAC, that way or not? It's not.
No, we post different things on our website,
Right.
and many of the members of the midwifery community as well as the physician community have signed up, who have a great interest in knowing what's going on regarding the board, the legislation, regulation, et cetera. And so that is something that we can ensure is posted in terms of the hearing date, so we can advise individuals of that for those who are interested.
Well, my concern, what I was trying to avoid is that come September or whenever it goes to the legislature or to wherever it's going to go, that you don't happen to have someone come in from wherever to suggest that they don't like, they didn't know, and they weren't aware of, and they want to.
And many times we leave that up to the organizations.
Okay,
So
so
there's a
you're-
physician organization, there is a
Right, there's-
midwifery
right, I just make sure
organization.
that-
There are organizations for all of our different types of licensees, and they're the ones who take
Okay,
that
so
on.
that the process then should be, it should be coming forward, or they should be reporting to the organizations.
Well,
Yeah.
the
Or suggestions.
organizations are most likely following what
Oh,
this
absolutely.
council does
Absolutely.
and will in fact follow the legislation. And I'm sure there will be discussion from members on this council to the various members of the organizations to let them know and to keep them abreast of what's going on.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so now we're back to meeting dates. So do you want to present the dates, or have we done that? I mean, I think we can all look at them under tab number 9, right?
Right. If you're able to make a decision today on the dates, that would be helpful so staff can begin organizing the dates. If you
Does
need to look
anybody
at
know when Easter or Passover is?
I have them here. I have it. I have it. Good Friday is March 29th.
Okay, then we're not doing the 28th.
Passover, the first Seder, I believe, is the 25th of March. So the 28th is in between
Yeah, that's the Holy
those.
Week. That's not a good week to be doing this.
Yeah.
so March
Can you repeat what you
21st.
just said?
Seder is March 25th.
Oh, that's true, Monday. It is there. I
Okay.
also know it's
Good
appeared-
Friday is March 29th. Pardon?
It appeared on my calendar since you said it.
How magic am I?
Okay, so,
Say Good Friday, the 29th, it's right here now.
so can we all agree on the 21st then?
I think it's the preferable date. It's not a great one for me, but I can make it.
So let me suggest that
And
Fine
are
for
these-
me.
What day of the week are these? Are these Thursdays still?
Thursday.
Thursdays from 1 to 4.
the problem is that it's for Passover, it's a major preparation. It's
Oh,
the
boy, is it.
21st. So I'm going to
Is
say
it-
the 21st is not any better than that.
Then the 28th. What, I was wondering if we could switch to a Tuesday, but I didn't really ask. No, doesn't work.
March 14th?
Are-
One
are
week.
Thursdays horrible for you?
No, they're not horrible. It's just harder for me to get the afternoon off. That's fine. I can make it work. It's just Tuesday would be nicer.
Is March 14th a possibility?
I can look into it.
The 14th should be fine. If there's a conflict, we can get back to you. But at this time, if you want to agree on the 14th, we can go with that.
Does that work for everybody?
I have no idea, but I'll try.
Okay.
Yes, for me.
And then I'm in favor of August 8th simply because of what Ms. Whitney just said about when the legislature comes back into session in middle to end of August, so that we have a report on language and stuff by then, before the legislature comes back into.
Does it matter if it's before the legislature comes back?
If we want
think
to
it would
take
be-
action, it would.
If we wanted
I
to?
think it could be helpful.
Okay, that's fine with me. I have no problem.
Muslim holiday the day before.
The day before,
Yeah.
but not the day of. Okay.
I don't know how long it's like,
I don't know either.
so I don't talk about it.
Okay. So August 8th is okay with everyone?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I don't know about anybody else, but I prefer earlier in December rather than
Yes.
later.
December's a horrible month.
Yeah.
No offense, it's a horrible month, especially for the Jews.
All right, so December 5th, August 8th, and March 14th.
Sounds fine.
Is that okay with
Just
everybody?
so that Barbara knows, the 4th is the 8th candle,
It's not-
and so that
it's
doesn't
not-
matter. I know, I know.
It's Christmas that I have a problem with you guys. Come on, Christmas.
All right.
I would like to ask if,
Never met.
yeah, I'd like to ask what the medical board meetings are for the coming year. I hear that there is one on
January 31st.
1st through the 1st.
April 25th, 26th, August 1st and 2nd. And I, for some reason, don't have December. Maybe we don't have a meeting in December. November.
July
November,
what?
sometimes November.
November, I'll look at.
Late October or no, early November is typical.
I don't have anything in October and November.
Should be end of October usually, no?
It's October 24th and 25th,
I thought
And
somewhere.
when is it in July?
July 18th and 19th.
Oh,
And
it's
25th,
not
26th
August 1st.
April?
Oh, wait a second. Wait, why do I have it different than you have it?
I don't know.
July 18th and 19th, 2013.
July 18th and 19th. MPC.
And April 24th, 25th?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Was there
No,
ever a
25th and 26th,
That's what I
October
said.
24th and 25th.
April.
April
Oh.
24, 25? Sorry.
Why don't we?
April, here, I'll start from the beginning.
Good idea.
January 31st and February 1st, April 25th and 26th, July 18th and 19th, and October 24th and 25th.
Very good. Did they decide where the October meeting was going to be ever?
Ontario?
It is going to be Ontario.
For real?
That's what's published on our
And see
website.
grandbabies, yeah. All right. Is there any public comment on when we're going to have our next meetings? Seeing none.
Oh, that is awful.
What?
October 24th and 25th is when the MANA conference is in Portland.
Oh, that sucks. It is.
That's too bad.
Yeah. All right. We can work on that next year. January is San Francisco. It's on the medical board's website. And April is
Los Angeles.
Los Angeles, July is Sacramento, and
Ontario.
October is Ontario. All right. So, agenda items. I would like to add a standing agenda item, which would be a report from the chair, just to encompass things like what the chair presented to the board and how that went or what have you. It doesn't have to be a long agenda item, but and then we're going to continue discussion about the MANA statistics project. I assume, do we still need to have the student stuff on there and the supervision and those kinds of things going forward, or do we not?
As there's, it's not been concluded, so we can continue to provide an update as needed.
Okay. Anybody else have anything they'd like on there?
Let me just ask you a question. It just hit me with the MANA statistics and the discussion on going forward, and that's going to go to the board. What is the schedule for the appropriateness for that to happen vis-a-vis OSHPD? Do they need to be
Well, I
informed?
can't.
They don't need. Okay,
No,
I'm here, no. I'm just
no.
the
Until we
answer's
get
no.
legislation
The
changed,
answer's no.
nothing's changing.
It's fine. No is a good answer. It's okay. It's a perfectly fine answer.
Yeah, I was.
What about an agenda item of an update on the Sunset Review?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, where are we with that at that point? Has I guess the legislature may or may not have had the hearing on that by then. Just don't know. Anybody else?
Let me ask you a question. Would it be at all beneficial to the larger community to have any kind of reporting from, today you heard from a school entity that does, just as a public comment, but would it a more either in-depth on remediation or issues of remediation, how something is remediated, education, the process of becoming educated and what is involved? I'm looking at this only from a process policy kind of thing, so for me it's not as the information is just interesting information, okay? But I'm wondering about for the broader community, is there any kinds of items of educational opportunities that if you were to ask someone to come and present for 5 or 10 minutes on a specific subject that would be informative to your constituencies? And I don't know the answer.
I don't know.
Maybe there's nothing that would be interesting, so it's possible. But it's something to think about. You as the chair can discuss with Ms. Lowe and figure it out, and if anyone has suggestions, they should bring them forward to you and to Ms. Lowe.
I'd also like to say that once I read the Sunset Review thing, I may add some things to the agenda
So, yeah,
based on that.
it's not in stone now. It's fine.
All right. Anybody else have anything more to say or add? Nope. All right, then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
You need to have a motion.
To adjourn?
Don't
She just did it.
I know.
You just moved it, right?
Yeah. Oh, I have to have a